Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today we are talking about flashbulb memories, so very clear, vivid memories, and looking at why we forget and some tips and tricks to help us better be able to recall memories. So let's get started. First, I'll show us these words. See what happens with them later. All right, so first thing, think about what some of your most clear and vivid memories are. So, what are some memories that are like kind of crystal clear ingrained in your brain? There's a term for these words called flashbulb memories. So, the textbook definition is a clear memory of an emotionally significant moment or event. And Brown and Kulik, the psychologists who discovered them, called it an exceptionally vivid snapshot of a moment when a surprising and emotionally arousing event happened in your life. So that's why it's called flashbulb memory. As the idea, it's kind of just like a perfect picture of that memory where it's very, very clear, accurate. Um, the keywords here are emotionally significant moment. Um, and that flashbulb memories are tied in with the amygdala we're going to discuss and helping sear those really emotional moments in our mind. And another key term here is clear or vivid, right? If you see something about an exceptionally clear or vivid memory, you can identify that as being a flashbulb memory. So we have empirical evidence to support this. Brown and Kulik were the first psychologists to discuss this term in 1977. They did a study in which they gave out a survey to ask people to rate how vividly they could recall the deaths of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and then a loved one. And they tried to look at the role of personal significance here. So they not only chose 40 Caucasian Americans, but they also chose 40 African Americans as a way to try and connect to, obviously, during the time, because it was the 70s, during the times, African American individuals would probably have a more personal connection to the death of Martin Luther King than they would as much of like JFK potentially. So they're trying to see if personal significance, and same thing with looking at the death of a loved one, see if personal significance might have a role in this. And their findings supported this hypothesis that, yes, personal significance is a factor. So about 90% of participants recalled a significant amount of detail from these days when, again, for anyone, though, the death of a president, death of a important leader or public figure or a loved one is going to, be a really emotional moment. So 90% of people recalled a significant amount of detail of the day when these occurred. They also found that personal relevance was a factor, so being able to personally connect to it more, and that 75% of Black participants had flashbulb memories of MLK compared to 33% of white Americans. So personal relevance and your connection to it is a factor. So the more connected personally you are to something that happens, the more of a clear and vivid memory you'll have. So flashbulb memory, some examples I give is like my grandma. She was, like probably in her 30s or 40s when Martin Luther King and JFK, around those years when they were both assassinated. And I know she tells the story of when she was heard the news on TV about JFK being killed. She was doing laundry and ironing. And obviously that was a long, long time ago. So flashbulb memory, it's kind of like you can remember the who, what, where, when, why of this moment. So you can say, I was here, I was doing this thing, here's what I was wearing, here's what I was with. 50 years later, you can identify all those things of not just what happened, but like the who, what, where, when, why of what was going on in that moment that you found out or experienced this memory. But we do see some limitations with this Brown and Kulik study in that it is self-report data with a survey. So how do we know that their memories were actually accurate, right? You cannot fact check those. So it could just be that they were really confident in these memories and not that they were actually correct. So that's the issue here. So we see something happens with the Nicer and Harsh study that they conducted in 1992. So this is after the Challenger explosion of the spaceship that launched. So they were trying to determine if flashbulb memories are susceptible to distortion. So, what they did is they gave a survey to people immediately after the event so they could answer all these things like who were you with, what were you doing, blah, blah, blah. And then they gave it to them again 2.5 years later. And they also asked them to rate their confidence in their memories each time. So, what they found is that people were actually highly confident in their memories 2.5 years later. So saying, yeah, this is, here's what I was wearing, here's what I was doing, here's who I was with. And they're very confident in saying that those were accurate memories. But it turns out that they're not actually accurate. So when they fact checked and compared back and verified their 2.5 year survey to the first one they took, they weren't actually that accurate despite being confident. So what they're claiming is that maybe flashbulb memories are more about confidence rather than it actually being very vivid. Um, but regardless, we do know that highly emotional memories and memories that are a little bit more clear are connected to the amygdala. And there's a reason for this looking back to evolutionary psychology. Um, if something really scary or dangerous happened to us, we want to remember that. So we're not going to be in that same situation or doing the same thing that was putting us in a dangerous environment. So it's an evolutionary trait to have the amygdala help us encode and really make vivid memories of those dangerous, scary situations. Another psychologist with the name of Sherritt found that the strength of amygdala activation at retrieval of memories, flashbulb memories, was strong. So there was a strong correlation between thinking about a type of flashbulb memory type thing of an emotional event and activation of the amygdala. And they even found that for something like 9/11, which was what she was researching, the people who were closer to the Twin Towers that day actually had stronger activation of the amygdala. So again, that idea of personal significance, right? You're closer to this, so it's even more seared into your brain. Now, flashbulb memories are unique and rare, in that there's only going to be, a few in your lifetime where you can really have this vivid memory. But there are some people, and actually one that I went to college, she was my orientation leader, who have something called highly superior autobiographical memory, which is where they can pretty much remember episodic memories of like their whole entire lives. So I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but there's some people who can remember in great detail pretty much anything that happened to them ever. So they can remember every day of their lives. Now, autobiographical memory is something that we all have. It's part of your explicit memory, so memory that is declarative that you are aware of, that deals with information about yourself. So it's tied in with semantic memory in that it's facts about yourself, or episodic memory, it's events that happen to you. So we all have autobiographical memory, but these potential people have highly superior autobiographical memory. So most people don't have this, but these people who have this unique ability would almost have like flashbulb level memories of their daily lives. So kind of interesting. And again, this is tied in with that self-reference effect too, a little bit, and that like you connect everything to your own life. So you can remember all these things that went on during the day. Like Marky, who's in this video that you could watch, that's linked in above, she could tell you when like Michael Jackson died. And the way she does it is because she connects everything back to like what she was doing on that day. So be like, oh, well, Michael Jackson died. I was doing this thing, blah, 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 blah. So that's kind of connected with the self-reference effect. So for the last bit of these slides, we're going to spend time talking about retrieval. So we've stored our memories. And like I said, like once you store them, they're there. They're not disappearing necessarily, but there's reasons why sometimes we have trouble activating and retrieving them and remembering them. So we're going to go over 3 measures of retention. So 3 ways that we are able to demonstrate that we have formed a memory. The first is recall, the second is recognition, and the third is relearning. So recall is being able to demonstrate that you formed a memory, and this is by retrieving the information that you learned earlier. So you have to kind of like doing Quizlet learn mode, or writing an FRQ, you have to pull that information from your brain. So you don't have like multiple choice options where you can just recognize what the correct answer is. You have to, pull and recall that information. So that's why Quizlet Learn is a really good thing to do, in that it's forcing you to like actually have to pull that exact word from your brain. It's not just recognizing it from a list of things. The second way is recognition. So, like I said, it's being able to demonstrate memory by identifying items previously learned. So, a multiple choice test is a great example of this, in that you have a list of items and you can recognize what the correct one is. So, not as intense as recall. Relearning is the third way of demonstrating memory, and this is by showing that you're able to learn something faster the second or third time that you learned it. So, for example, maybe you started learning Spanish in like preschool or something, and then you went through elementary school and didn't learn it, and then you're back in middle or high school, and you're able to learn it more quickly the second time around, because even though you kind of forgot that stuff, it comes back a little bit faster because you did have that prior exposure to it. Another example is a lot of you guys take human body systems before you take psych. So maybe you kind of forgot a little bit of that stuff, but you're going to learn about the neuron faster than your peers who haven't taken human body system, because you have that prior exposure. So relearning is just the idea that you're demonstrating that you do have some kind of a memory of these things, because you are learning it faster the second or third time you learn it. But we see sometimes, and this is Herman Ebbinghaus is a very important psychologist to know from this unit. He created something called the retention curve. And this shows relearning here. So we have time and minutes taken to relearn a list of words that people were given a few days prior. So we see that this is number of repetitions of list on day 1, and this is time and minutes taken to relearn on day 2. So we see the more time you spent rehearsing or trying to learn those terms the first time, the less time it's going to take you to relearn them later on, a couple days later, when you're giving those words again. So right, this is showing relearning. It's taking them less time to relearn things that they were previously exposed to. So now we're going to talk about retrieval cues. And these are things that help us recall and remember things better. Because like I said, a lot of things get clouded up and it's hard to pull them out of our brain. So we're going to talk about retrieval cues, which are things that help us be better able to pull memories out and recall them. So first term is called priming. So if you see one of the words that I gave you, or you didn't see it actually, at the start of class, I would have played a song from the Breakfast Club, the Don't You Forget About Me one. And it's likely that you would have been able to, here, if I put Breakfast Club, you would have been able to fill in the blanks a little bit better, because you were primed or previously exposed to something that would help you later on kind of recognize that. So priming are cues that help stimulate memory retrieval without our conscious awareness. So again, it's when you're previously exposed to something, you're not really thinking about it or consciously aware of it, but then later on, you're able to kind of unconsciously use that exposure to maybe fill in the blank or, recall something. So in my example here, if you saw a picture of the Breakfast Club earlier at the start of class, and then you were given this fill in the blank, you'd be much better equipped to answer that correctly than someone who is not exposed to that picture of the Breakfast Club at the start of class. And again, this is typically outside of our conscious awareness. So we even talked about like the Rat Man a little bit, like you were primed with the picture of either the people or the animals before you looked at the Rat Man illusion. That's kind of an example of that. Next retrieval cue is called context-dependent memory. So this is the idea that memory is more easily recalled when you are learning it in the same setting, or you're recalling it in the same setting that the learning took place. So, for example, I would not want you guys to be taking a test in a different room for this class, because being in the same environment that you learn the information in helps you recall that information better. So I would want you guys to take the exam in the same seats in the same classroom that you learn the information in. And that's why the AP exam is a struggle, but everyone's in it together, I guess. But right, you're not taking it in the classroom that you learned that information in originally. So it might be a little hard to remember things. Then we have state dependent memory. And this is the idea that information learned in a particular state of mind is more easily recalled when in that same state of mind. So this could be states such as drunk or sober, like that state of mind, but it also could be like an emotional state that you're in. So, an example that everyone always finds funny is researchers found that if an alcoholic hid something while under the influence of alcohol, they were more likely to find it when they were indeed drunk again rather than when they were sober. And again, this is not saying that you guys should, be consuming alcoholic beverages while you're studying and then taking tests, because you still would not do as well. But it is the idea that you're going to remember things better in the state that you encoded them in. So just keep showing up to school sober and then taking your test while sober, and you'll be great due to state dependent memory. Another form of state dependent memory, I said, is mood congruent memory because, emotions are an emotional state of mind. So this is the idea you're more likely to recall experiences that are consistent with one's current or bad mood. So for example, if you are currently in a happy, good mood, you're more you are more likely to recall memories that are happy and good versus when you're already in a sad mood. So you're currently in a sad mood, you're better equipped to remember memories that are sad as well. So that's not helpful if you're in like a depressive episode. According to mood congruent memory, you're more likely to just remember sad things rather than happy things as well. And then last, retrieval cue is something called the serial position effect. And this has two parts of it. So it is the idea that we recall things best at the start of a list and the end of the list. And then the middle kind of gets muddled together and we forget about it. So in this case, if you're trying to be strategic with a job interview, and I did this when I applied for Oconomowoc, you want to be the first person to go in the interview, which is called a primacy effect, in that you remember things at the beginning of a list better, or you want to be the last one of a list, and that's called the recency effect because it's the most recent. You don't want to be in the middle because you might be forgotten. And I give the example of the Bachelor franchise in the first day when all the women or men are coming out of the limo. You don't want to be in the middle of the people that are all coming. You want to be either the first one out of the limo or the last one. And then they're more likely to get that first impression rose potentially. Okay, so now we're going to finally end by talking about reasons we forget. So we talked about things that can help us retrieve and recall things better, but we're going to talk about reasons why, despite forming memories, we can't remember them. So the first reason why we forget has to do with amnesia. And we just said amnesia is literally just the inability to remember things. So there's two forms of amnesia that exist. There's retrograde and anterograde amnesia. Retrograde is the inability to remember past memories. And you can remember that because if you think like something's retro, it's like old, far out, groovy, right? Like vintage. So it's the inability to remember old memories. Anterograde amnesia is the inability to form new memories. So we see with HM and with Clive Wearing and those buddies who who had their hippocampus damaged, we said that hippocampus is important structure in forming new memories and getting them ready for storage. So if your hippocampus is busted, you are going to have trouble with anterograde amnesia of forming new memories. And that's why HM and Clive Wearing, they're kind of stuck in that present moment and that they can't form new memories. So that's anterograde amnesia. Next one we got are encoding failure. So encoding failure is just failing to get things in your memory system. So it's not even that like you can't access it. in your long-term memory, it's just not even there. It didn't make it to long-term memory, right? We said we have to go through our three stores. Encoding failure is when stuff doesn't even get to your long-term memory because we didn't notice it. We failed to process into memory, right? We failed to encode it. So here we said encoding is just that idea of noticing it and getting it into the memory system. Well, in this case, we can't remember what we never formed a memory of. So if you didn't pay attention to your sensory memory to get it into working memory and all that jazz, that's encoding failure. So it just didn't make it through all those steps. Then we've got storage decay. And this connects again to our buddy Ebbinghaus. And he calls this the forgetting curve. So basically, what his research found is that um, we forget. So, say you're studying, we forget things initially. So, what we forget initially is really rapid. So, in the first day or so of learning something, like we forget a ton of what we just learned. But then, over time, after that initial period, it kind of levels off and we stay pretty consistent with what we forget. So that is the forgetting curve. That initially, when you learn something, forgetting is really rapid. So right, it goes from like 60% to 30% of things that we remember in the immediate days after learning something. But then it pretty much levels off and like, okay, you're gonna remember about like 20% of what you learn for the most, next extended period of time. And then finally, we got TOT phenomenon. This is a fun one. It stands for tip of the tongue phenomenon. We get this all the time when there's like, you can't remember the name of like a celebrity, you can't remember the name of like someone you know, or like there's a term that for like trivia or something that you like, I know it, it's on the tip of my tongue. That's a literal psychological phenomenon. Tip of the tongue phenomenon. It is the temporary inability to remember something you know, accompanied by a feeling that it's just out of reach, right? It's like, on the tip of my tongue, can't get it. So that's a genuine thing for why we forget. And then finally, we're going to end by talking about retrieval failure, which are, there's three forms of these. So we said retrieval is again retrieving things from long-term memory. So here is some issues that happen when it comes to retrieving them. So sometimes we engage in motivated forgetting, in which we are intentionally trying to forget and push away memories. And this is what Freud would call repression, right? It's the burying down, pushing down negative thoughts, feelings, and memories. So they are outside of our conscious awareness, right? It was something that was really cringy, traumatic, whatever. We're trying to repress them and bury them away. So that's motivated forgetting. You're intentionally trying to forget something. And then we've got two forms of interference in which things are kind of blocking you from accessing your long-term memories. There's proactive and there's retroactive interference. And pay attention to these because they get tripped up all the time, and there are definitely going to be questions on these in the test. So really make sure you understand the difference. So again, the thing with these is that the memories, they haven't faded. There's just things blocking you from accessing them. So, retroactive interference is the disruptive effect of new learning on the recall of old information. So, in this case, you cannot remember the old stuff. It's retro, right? Vintage. What you cannot remember is the old memories. And the reason for that is because new information is blocking it. So, for example, say you moved, you have a new address, and now you realize you're not able to remember what your old address was. That's retroactive interference. The new address is blocking the old one. Same thing like you made a new password for an account. This happens to me all the time. So you can remember the new password, but now you can't remember the old password. Retroactive interference. The new thing is blocking you from accessing the old. So again, what you are forgetting is the old stuff. Proactive interference, flip-flop it around, it's the opposite. So it's the disruptive effect of prior learning on the recall of new information. So it's something old that is blocking you from remembering something new you're trying to learn. I think taking different foreign languages is part of this. So, for example, I took French in high school, and then when I studied abroad, I took Italian for a little bit. And sometimes what I had learned in French, would kind of block me from remembering the correct Italian word for it. So again, proactive interference, I can't remember the new stuff in Italian I'm trying to learn because the old stuff from French is like getting muddled in there and blocking it. So that's what we've got here. Lots of things. So just make sure you're really memorizing these graphics of um, retrieval cues, so things that help us remember better, and then those reasons of why we forget, particularly being able to differentiate between antero and retrograde amnesia and proactive and retrograde active interference, because those ones can get tricky. All right, there you go.